Hello and welcome to CCTV News. I'm Vimbai Kajese live in Beijing, where the time now is 4 o'clock in the morning. Our top story: the Finnish Parliament on Wednesday backed extending the powers of a major Eurozone bailout fund as members of the ruling coalition sought to keep the country on a pro-Europe course. Lawmakers comfortably supported the new powers for the European Financial Stability Facility, with 103 in favour and 66 against. All lawmakers from the 6 government parties agreed to the July 21st proposal by Eurozone leaders to allow the EFSF to give precautionary loans to countries and buy sovereign bonds when needed. The Finnish government is under pressure from voters fed up with bailing out other European nations, particularly after the Eurosceptic True Finns made strong gains in April elections to become the leading opposition party.
I'm very satisfied that the Parliament of Finland has approved the changes to the EFSF because it's important in order to strengthen the confidence within this crisis, and also it will make the facility more flexible, which is very important for dealing or handling the situation.
As Greece awaits the inspectors of the IMF, EU and the European Central Bank to check on Greece's progress in implementing its economic austerity measures, domestic protests are continuing on the property tax, which has been extended until 2014.
As painful cuts in Greece accelerate, so do the protests. Many Greeks are outraged by the latest burden, an unpopular property tax which has been extended until 2014.
I think it is very bad indeed that they voted for this, because people are literally hungry. I'm not exaggerating, they really are hungry.
A team of international inspectors will check on Greece's progress on Thursday. The country is scrambling to implement reforms in exchange for €8 billion of aid to avoid default next month. NAB analyst Tom Voser.
I think this is going to be a fairly short stay for the Troika. They'll be out fairly shortly, but they will approve the measures that have been cast, and they will therefore open the way for the second tranche to come through.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel has told Greek television the terms of that bailout may change, depending on the outcome of the inspectors' audit. But analysts aren't expecting major alterations.
I don't think we're reopening the whole thing in terms of the size of the package or indeed the support from national government. It's more a tidying up at the edges exercise.
Germany's parliament is due to vote on Thursday on changes which will strengthen the region's bailout fund. Taxpayer resentment there is high.
I think Greece is to blame because they have so few taxes. I think it's good the way it is in Germany. We do have taxes, many taxes, so we have a lot of income as a country and we can afford our infrastructure. But this isn't the case with Greece. I don't understand why we have to pay this.
But Merkel is expected to win the vote, says Professor Jürgen Folter at the University of Mainz.
Angela Merkel will have a majority tomorrow, a majority for the European safety system. But it may be that she won't have a majority on her own from her own coalition. And this would mean, of course, at least symbolically, that she would be weakened.
Finland's parliament voted on Wednesday in favour of extending the powers of the bailout fund. The ruling coalition wants to keep the country on a pro-Europe course, despite strong Eurosceptic opposition.
France says it's cutting its budget for the first time since World War II after years of blowing off EU rules on keeping spending in check. In its 2012 budget unveiled on Wednesday, the French government promised to cut around 30,400 public jobs next year by not replacing 1 in 2 retirees. It also pledged to raise more money by taxing the rich and items such as sugary drinks, while also closing loopholes. The 2012 budget should reduce the deficit by nearly €15 billion as compared with 2011.
C'est surtout un budget historique. This is a historic budget mainly because for the first time since 1945, the state spending will be reduced from one year to the next. It's also a balanced and equitable budget. Equitable because the reduction effort is carefully engineered to preserve growth. Equitable because efforts will have to come essentially from large companies rather than the medium and small ones, well-off households rather than the modest ones.
U.S. President Barack Obama says his country's economic troubles are due in part to the European financial turmoil. On Wednesday, he blamed European nations have not done enough to fix weaknesses in their financial sector. He pressed the Eurozone leaders to take stronger measures to resolve the region's debt crisis. Obama also mentioned that the political instabilities in some Arab countries have hampered the economies of Europe and the U.S.
Some of the challenges that we've had over the last several months actually have to do with the fact that in Europe we haven't seen them deal with their banking system and their financial system as effectively as they needed to. The changes that have taken place in the Middle East sent oil prices up, and that gave a shock to the world economy.
The UN says food assistance has reached nearly half the Somalis in need. The statement comes as it warned cases of diarrhea and cholera could spike with the seasonal rains expected in October. Well, the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said famine relief has gotten about 1.85 million Somalis. Tens of thousands of Somalis already have died from a lack of food, and 750,000 more are at risk of death from famine in the next 4 months. 6 areas in southern Somalia have been declared famine zones. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization reports that cases of diarrhea and cholera are down through October. Rains could pose a high risk of transmission of waterborne diseases in highly populated camps for those displaced by the famine. As the Pakistani flood crisis continues, relief agencies are warning that millions face shelter and food shortages. A UN humanitarian agency says international donors have been slow to respond to its appeal, which has so far only raised 3% of the total required. Our correspondent Fazana Fiaz went to the flood-stricken province of Sindh to find out what exactly survivors need.
200 kilometers northeast of Pakistan's largest city lies Tando Alayar, a district badly affected by this year's floods. As you drive through the town and into the surrounding rural area, the signs of flood devastation become depressingly apparent. What were once fields of cotton and rice are now swamps of floodwater. The farming families who tended the land are now stranded on whatever high ground they can find. Whole communities living on roadsides, under makeshift tents or under the open sky. The lucky few have found their way to a handful of relief camps. This one, set up by the local administration, is woefully ill-equipped to deal with the 250 families dwelling here. Limited and poor quality rations enrage those who've lost everything.
Look at what we have been given. That's even not fit for animals.
As the relief agency slowly grinds into gear, aid agencies have set about implementing disaster plans. But such plans need funding, and this week the UN's humanitarian coordination body said that the international community has been slow to respond. $9 million have been contributed so far, just 3% of the total funds needed. Until the rest is found, around 7 million people like this are forced to carry on as normal, or as normally as one can in a disaster zone.
It's impossible to appreciate the extent of the flooding without coming here to see it for yourself. And yet people are trying to go about their everyday business as best they can. There's no panic, no disorder, just a resignation to life as it stands today. And with the expectation that flooding may now become an annual event in Pakistan, this has come as no surprise to people here. Hardship has long been a fact of life.
Pakistanis have seen it all before, of course. Last year's flood saw 2,000 people killed and 20 million others affected. Homes, livestock and crops swept away in the unforgiving monsoon rain. And with this year's calamity serving only to compound last year's, survivors are left contemplating a bleak future. Fazana Fiaz, CCTV, Sindh Province, Pakistan.
Welcome back. The United Nations Security Council has unanimously agreed to hand the application by the Palestinians for full UN membership as a state to a committee that will review it in the coming weeks. Andy Dupuy has the details.
The UN Security Council took its first official step to consider the Palestinians' request for full membership at the world body. Lebanese Ambassador Nawaf Salam, who holds this month's rotating council presidency, announced that he is forwarding the Palestinians' request to the Committee on New Admissions, which includes all 15 member states on the council. The committee will meet to consider the Palestinian request for membership on Friday. Palestinian envoy to the UN, Riyad Mansour, thanked the council for quickly and unanimously agreeing to act on the Palestinian application. The application process could take weeks before it comes to a final vote in the Council, where the United States has vowed to veto the measure should it receive the necessary 9 of 15 Council votes in favor of membership for Palestine. Mansour did not address U.S. opposition to the move, but commented on Israel's decision on Tuesday to give the go-ahead for 1,100 new settlements to be built in East Jerusalem.
They gave 1,100 answers of saying no to the effort of the international community of opening doors for negotiation, and I think that this speaks clearly that Israel is not interested in negotiating with us, in spite of the fact that they say they like to do so, but their action speaks louder than what they say verbally.
Meanwhile, Israel's ambassador to the UN reiterated its opposition to the Palestinians' unilateral declaration of statehood and bid for UN membership.
I hear the Palestinians using every pretext in order to find a reason why not to go into negotiations. And if you zoom back for a second, all we want, and I think everything that the world will want, and both Palestinians and Israelis would want, is for both sides to sit down and negotiate everything. Nothing is off the table.
The United States, along with its partners in the Quartet of Mideast peacemakers, the UN, the European Union and Russia, have called for the Israelis and Palestinians to return to negotiations and reach agreement by the end of next year. Andrew Dupuy, CCTV.
Russia expressed strong opposition on Wednesday to a revised Western draft resolution condemning Syria for its crackdown on opposition protesters. The revised version drops calls for immediate sanctions. The Western draft was circulated on Tuesday by Britain, France, Germany and Portugal. It aims at breaking a deadlock at the UN Security Council over Syria. The draft includes the threat of sanctions if the government of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad doesn't halt military operations against civilians. Russia's UN ambassador Vitaly Churkin told the reporters that the revisions still do not satisfy Moscow because they continue a clear policy of regime change in Syria. Yemeni Vice President Abd Rabu Mansour Hadi has announced the beginning of an initial negotiation with the opposition to implement a Gulf brokered initiative. The announcement was made during a meeting in the capital Sana'a between Hadi and ambassadors of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, the European Union and the GCC to Yemen. Hadi urged all parties to commit to the terms of the GCC initiative and begin to withdraw armed forces and tribal militants from cities. The GCC deals calls on Saleh to step down and hand over power to his deputy, who will then form an opposition-led national government and arrange presidential elections within 60 days. An anti-Gaddafi field commander says a top military official for the NTC forces, Dor Salehin, has been killed in a rocket attack in Bani Walid, southwest of Tripoli. Salehin was imprisoned for more than 20 years by Muammar Gaddafi's regime and was leading anti-Gaddafi forces in their battle for Bani Walid. Meanwhile, NATO claims about 200,000 Libyan civilians are still under threat by forces loyal to the country's former regime, primarily in Sirte and Bani Walid. NTC military commanders say their forces have battled their way into the eastern outskirts of Sirte in a bid to link up with anti-Gaddafi fighters besieging the city from the west. For nearly 2 weeks, the anti-Gaddafi forces have regularly fired mortars, Grad rockets and tank shells into the city. A senior military commander in charge of Libya's interim government forces in Benghazi says he's certain Muammar Gaddafi has left the country.
I'm personally convinced that Muammar Gaddafi is out of Libya because he has no courage to stay in Libya. Not him, not his sons. Maybe some of his sons are trapped and under siege and cannot leave, but Gaddafi, I'm personally convinced, left the country even before his family departed.
The statement conflicts with comments from another senior Libyan military official, Hisham Bouhaghir.